Okay, let's get going. I know that we have a bit to cover, and I just want to make sure that we have enough time for questions throughout. So let's get rolling for today's conversation. I want to thank all of you who have already started to tune in or who are here at the top of the hour. I'm Alexis Doyle. I work for SaskPower as a public engagement consultant, and today I am joined by two of my colleagues. I have Nanette Solomon, who is the manager of supply planning, and Leanne Persicki, manager of transition planning and asset management support. We're going to take a little bit of a different approach here for today's webinar. We all know what a webinar looks and feels like, and today it's probably not what you'd expect. We're really looking to have more of a conversation. So over this next hour, I am going to pick Leanne and Nanette's brains about how our province is currently powered and the supply options we're considering now and for the future. So with that, I'd like to just take a minute here to acknowledge that we here at SaskPower, the work we do reaches the ancestral lands of many nations. And for Nanette, Leanne, and myself, we're coming together and we're sharing our ideas and coming together in conversation today on Treaty 4, which is also the homeland of the Métis. This Friday is September 30th, which marks the second year for our National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We know that many of you might be joining us from across the province, and we hope that you set aside time to attend local events to recognize and reflect upon the tragic history and legacy of residential schools. So with that, just some quick notes on how to submit your questions and contact us if you're having technical difficulties. So at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a black banner. That includes a chat function. And you click here and it'll open up a new pop-up box. You can send messages directly to us, and we'll ask that you just keep the chat for technical issues. So if you're experiencing those, use the chat function. If you have questions for us, please type these into the Q&A box, which is also at the bottom of your screen in that black banner. When you click a Q&A or click the Q&A icon, another pop-up box is going to appear. And here you can enter those questions, make sure to click send. These questions will only be seen by us. If we reply in writing, you'll see the answers in the Q&A window. We might also answer your questions during our discussion today. And so if we do that, you'll see a quick notification that says the question will be answered live. Okay, so we know that we have a few different levels of understanding when it comes to our supply mix in our audience today. We're going to start with this quick 1-minute video to talk about how power is made.
How do we generate power? Since its discovery, electricity has revolutionized everyday life. We rely on it to power our homes, businesses, and communities. Almost 200 years ago, the first electric generator used a small magnet and metal coil to produce an electric current. We still use this same basic process today, but on a massive scale. The electricity we rely on is produced by turbines. As they spin, they convert this mechanical energy into electrical energy. We need to spin a lot of turbines to generate enough power for all of Saskatchewan. SaskPower does this in different ways. With natural forces like water in our hydroelectric stations, and wind, which keeps our giant wind turbines spinning. Combustion turbines burn natural gas. The hot gases are used to power the turbines. And power stations also burn coal to convert water into steam to spin turbines. Solar power is a completely different kind of power source. It uses solar panels to absorb the photons in sunlight and convert them into electric current. Coal, hydro, wind, natural gas, solar, these are all used to generate power in Saskatchewan.
Okay, great. So short and sweet. Oh, and it repeats in case you missed it. No, we just wanted to start with that quick video to help build just a common understanding of how power is made. And with those ideas in mind, we had the graph pulled up here, which is basically our current supply mix by source. I wonder if we can start with you, Nanette. can you just give us a little bit of an overview around our current mix? And given the title of today's session, Our Power is Changing, tell us a little bit more about what specifically needs to shift.
Okay, sure. So looking at our graph, some good news. We've recently doubled our wind capacity, so we're up to 12% there. We have 19% of our capacity from hydro, 4% from other. This includes things like carbon capture on one of our coal facilities, some solar that we've been adding, flare gas, waste heat, a little bit of landfill gas, and a new biomass project. But that still leaves about 65% coming from fossil fuels in the form of natural gas and conventional coal. What needs to shift? We are looking at adding a lot of renewables. We're going to be getting up to 50% of our capacity from renewables by 2030. And we are retiring our conventional coal by 2030. That's by a federal regulation as well. So that will be shifting. Let's take a look at an emissions graph that we have showing our current plan to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So this shows the path that we have been on, and it also shows a line in the middle that says that we'll be achieving our target. We're well on target to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to 50% below 2005 levels by 2030. So these are great places where we've been making progress. But we do recognize that we probably need to do more. We do need to do more. There are federal clean electricity regulations that are in draft right now, but they're calling for all electric utilities to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. And so our mix of technologies will need to shift.
Okay, that's a helpful overview. I just want to bring it down one level because you talked about the concept of net zero. I just want to make sure, because there could be people in the audience who aren't familiar with that term. Can you just quickly explain that? Maybe Leanne, Annette?
Yeah, I can explain it. In the simplest form, it means any greenhouse gas emissions that are released are balanced by an equal amount taken out of the atmosphere. The government of Canada, as Nanette said, has a goal to have the electricity sector, in effect, have no emissions by GHGs, which is greenhouse gas emissions, by 2035. So that means either you're not putting them in the air or they're being taken out. SaskPower and other industry that has to emit will be looking for offsets. So somewhere, someone has locked away a ton of CO2 and they're going to get credit for that. They're able to demonstrate that they made the effort and the investment and the carbon emission savings was real and can be measured. And that gives them ownership of this certified credit. But there's others like SaskPower that emit CO2, and either we wish we didn't have to, or we have to lock it away somehow. We couldn't do it. So we take a shortcut route and we buy that credit for someone that has earned that certified credit. They own that credit, which proves that the hard work was done by someone, somewhere, and that counts as a way of reducing an emission somewhere, somehow.
Okay, so that's helpful. So what I hear you saying is like, we're going to try to reduce the emissions from our power generation as much as possible through technology changes and supply mix changes. And then what we can't reduce, we then offset. Okay. We did get a question, Nanette, around power from wind. What is a reasonable percent amount that we would expect from wind after 2030? So I think that's more like, what percentage can we expect, or what are we targeting after that 2030 goal of 50% from renewables?
Yeah, so we will be continuing to add renewables after 2030 as well. Targets are yet to be set, but really it all comes down to trying to meet that net zero greenhouse gas emissions target. Right now we're looking at, or we have been working towards 2050. Right now we're looking at evolving that plan and seeing how we can move that forward. So I don't have a number to share with you today, but we are working on, how much How much can we add, how quickly, and how will that evolve?
Okay, when I look at this graph and I hear you talking about our goals for the amount of renewables we want to bring on the grid, getting to 2030 and beyond, I think about how long it has taken a utility, like let alone SaskPower, to build our current grid and power generation options. I'm looking at these targets and I'm wondering, how realistic are they?
That's a great point. And that's exactly the question we're challenged with today. We have been doing a lot of work around trying to answer that question. And the point that we're at right now is that we feel that in Saskatchewan, it really isn't possible to get to net zero emissions by 2035. There are financial, technological, and logistical constraints that prevent us from getting there. And what I mean by that is to transition, we will need technologies that aren't even developed yet. And it will require a vast build out of new generation and transmission. And so that's the logistical constraints. And while we are definitely focused on, our mission is to provide reliable, sustainable, and cost-effective power, we need to ensure that that reliable and cost-effective portion is still considered as well. And it also speaks a little bit to Leanne's point on offsets. Net zero doesn't mean exactly zero, but you have to be able to purchase the offsets to count yourself as net zero. And we're not sure that in 2035, there will even be enough offsets out there for us to purchase. It's a question still to be answered.
Interesting. I didn't really think about the supply and demand concept when it came to offsets, especially if every utility across the country is working toward that 2035 net zero goal. I'll be honest, it feels like we've got we've got a long way to go, especially just again thinking about some of the other provinces which have low emission generation options. So I'm thinking, say, BC, Manitoba, Quebec. They depend mostly on hydro. I think we do have a map that we can pull up here to just give the lay of the land across the different provinces. So I know Ontario has a mix of generation options. So there's some similarities or parallels between SaskPower and the utilities in Ontario. Now, I know that most of their energy comes from nuclear and hydro, as you can see here, which those emit very low emissions when they generate power. So when we're thinking about, say, Ontario, is it safe to assume that they're pretty close to achieving net zero? So by comparison to that graph that we were looking at earlier for SaskPower, they're probably almost there. Am I right?
They are almost there. They're 94% emissions free as of 2020. They retired their conventional coal in 2014. They were one of the first in North America to do so. They are predicting a slight bump. They're going to have to do some work on their nuclear fleet. But the problem, there was just a report released on net zero by Ontario's Independent Electricity System Operator. We call them ISO. That just says that last 6% is incredibly hard to achieve. If it was possible, which ISO says it's not, because there's no like-for-like replacement of the natural gas that they have on their system, it would require a massive build out of renewables and reliance on energy efficiency measures that it just wouldn't be possible to do by 2030. It's possible, but not by 2030. They would also need imports from Quebec of a massive quantity that isn't available. And they would still see things like businesses voluntarily having to reduce their peak about 4 times a week, emergency action like conservation appeals, voltage reductions, and rotating blackouts. So for that reason, they're saying that last 6% is incredibly hard to reach, and to do it in such a tight timeline is even harder.
Okay, so based on that 6% that Leanne's highlighting of natural gas in Ontario's power mix and power generation, being like a pretty challenging supply option to replace, I just want to throw this to Nanette. If Ontario is working on this sliver and it's a big lift to achieve it, I know we are building new gas, and I wonder why that is. If we're going to basically be increasing the percentage on our grid.
Oh, that's a great point. And I think there's basically two parts to that answer. One is that we have limited options. We also have a lot of natural gas availability in the province, so it's a good option for us. And the second part is that it provides us with what we need. So when I speak to limited options, I'm talking about we have a number of options that are available to us right now, but we need a mix of options. And some of those options have to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And natural gas and imports are currently the only two options we have that can provide that, what we call base load power. And so imports will be a great part of the transition until new technologies are built. We're calling them a little bit of a bridge for us, but there's a limit to how much we can import. So we're really going to still be relying on natural gas in the interim. And we need that natural gas to help us transition from conventional coal. We have over 1,400 megawatts of conventional coal that we have to replace between 2021 and 2030. The benefit with natural gas is it has half the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, compared to conventional coal. So that will already be a bit of a win for us. The second part is natural gas really does have some functionality that we really need to take advantage of. We are adding a lot of renewables, working to reduce our emissions, working to increase our renewable capacity. But that's primarily in the form of wind and solar. And that's great. We have a great wind and solar resource in Saskatchewan. We want to take advantage of that, but they're variable. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. So we need that natural gas to back it up. And until technologies like energy storage are really developed to the point where we can use them fully, we need something that can be really fast acting. And that's what natural gas gives us. It has the ability to start really quickly, stop really quickly, and just kind of follow that wind, for example, up and down. It's something that people might not consider, but power has to be used in real time. So if you look at our grid control center, they're kind of like air traffic controllers. You can imagine air traffic controllers, all these planes are coming in, going out, and everybody's kind of heard about what a stressful job that is. It's sort of the same for our grid control folks. They have to, demand goes up, they have to turn something on. Wind goes down, they have to turn something off. It's all happening in real time until we get sort of more of that smart grid technology, which we are working on. We are modernizing our grid right now. We're going to need technologies like natural gas to help support that renewable addition.
I think you've probably answered this question already, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it just because I know that there could be some people in the audience who are thinking about this, and I know we hear it again and again. So let's just answer this question outright. Why can't it be 100% renewable?
That's a good question. I think that's a question that a lot of people do have. And I think ultimately, that could be the goal. Someday, maybe you could be 100% renewable, but the answer is right now, we don't have that ability. And it comes down to a couple things. As I was just mentioning, a lot of our renewable resource in Saskatchewan is going to be wind and solar. And that's that variable power that we were talking about. And so you need to have something steady, something that can be available any time of the day or night, any season of the year, to back that up. So you could look at, are there other renewables that could fill that need for us? And there are. We do have, I think I was showing almost 20% of our capacity from hydro in the province right now. We've really sort of maximized our economic options for hydro in the province currently. We are looking to expand a little bit in the future. There are some options out there that are sort of, beyond the low-hanging fruit. It takes a little bit of work. So we're considering those in the next stage of technologies that we can try to reach for. But even still, we don't have that same hydro resource that other provinces have, like Manitoba beside us. So it still won't be enough baseload power to cover off that need. And then there are some other renewable baseload like biomass, but it's limited by cost and just availability of fuel supply. So in the near term, it's still going to play a small role in Saskatchewan. Meadow Lake Tribal Council does have a new project coming online. I think it's about 8 megawatts, reusing, utilizing the waste stream from a sawmill, which is a great example of biomass built to purpose-built the size of the fuel supply available to you. But again, it's going to be small scale. So altogether, until you have a technology like energy storage, we will still need to have, imports or natural gas generation to back up those renewables.
We actually have a question about imports, and I know you've highlighted a few times already, Nanette. Just a question about, I guess in the US, there's an understanding that the east and west grids are not connected, and wondering where can Saskatchewan import power from?
Okay, very interesting. So we are connected to Alberta, Manitoba, and into North Dakota to the Southwest Power Pool. And so those are our 3 opportunities to increase imports in the future. We have recently announced that we are building a new tie line into the Southwest Power Pool to the south, to the United States. And that will increase our ability to import power up to 650 megawatts by 2027. And we also have those opportunities to the provinces beside us. And so those conversations will be ongoing, and we'll see what can happen in the future.
Okay. It's probably also important to point out, we are importing from all of those markets now.
Right.
We're just limited by how much those power lines, those transmission lines can use or accommodate.
Okay, the limited capacity of moving power. Just to jump back to the renewables answer and about storage, a question on if power storage will ever be a possibility.
Yes, it definitely will. In fact, we're building our first battery energy storage facility right now. It's going to come online in Regina next year. And even though we've started, it's still developing technology. So there's a lot of different battery technologies out there. They're evolving. Hopefully with time, costs will come down and become more available to us. And as that happens, we will certainly have a greater uptake. There's also other kinds of energy storage, compressed air energy storage, for example, and in the future, perhaps even storage in the form of hydrogen storage.
Okay. We also have someone who's sitting in who is semi-retired and based in Saskatoon, had a career as an educator and a school principal, and then was in Calgary for a little bit as well. I guess he has some existing and past relationships with companies who are looking to develop projects on brownfields. Looks like it's specifically solar. And just wondering if you might be able to comment, because you've been talking about some renewables and bringing more online. How would we attract international firms to use their expertise and funds to come to Saskatchewan? Because just thinking about the time and resources we would need to do that overhaul of our grid.
We do work with a number of outside Saskatchewan organizations. We have a lot of our wind development is done by, bigger organizations that can help and bring their expertise to us. All our wind and solar to this point has been solicited through power RFPs for proposals. So we are, open to these solutions. We are open to the interesting proposals for sure. We have a group that focuses on that.
Okay, so there is a process in place for some of these projects, and information on that. How does one access information? Just to quickly, out of curiosity, if you wanted to know how to respond to it.
There is information on saskpower.com for the unsolicited power proposals, and when we do an RFP, we do go out to the open market.
Okay, great. I know we're getting a lot of other great questions kind of coming in, but we're just going to move on, and we'll incorporate that into our discussion, and maybe get to them at the end of the session when we have our general Q&A. I know, just thinking about some of the unique circumstances here in Saskatchewan, weather and temperature comes to mind, especially our extremes. We have, we can have some very hot summers. We've had some hot weeks this last summer. And as we all know, we get very cold winters. When we have those hot weeks and hot days, I always imagine everybody just like cranking up their air conditioning, which has to be like a huge draw on electricity for SaskPower. And then when I think about the winter and the -40 weather, my car doesn't run so well in that weather and those temperatures. And I assume that that's true for our power plants as well when it comes to generating power in those -40 days. So what are some ways that we're trying to manage those extremes, especially as we expect more of them in the future? And maybe we'll start with you, Nanette.
Okay. So the first thing that comes to mind is that's really where we start to rely on our baseload power, our steady power that's available, we said 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but also seasonally. We have right now strong reliance on our conventional coal and natural gas for those super cold days. We design our facilities to be able to operate during those times. And that's a big thing that sets us apart from some other locations, is that we do have those really extreme cold temperatures. Even you saw Texas a little while ago, they had sudden cold snap and they had natural gas, but theirs couldn't operate because they hadn't been designed.
Average is usually about 18 degrees Celsius during the day. We're going to see 27 today here in Regina, and I think they're saying 31 tomorrow. There will be air conditioners. There will be an increased demand in our electricity.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about the shoulder seasons before in that way. I know I hear a lot about the concept of climate adaptation, so it sounds like that's something that's on our radar here as well. We've touched on a few considerations when it comes to, what's unique here in the province and things we take into account when we're planning. Are there others that we haven't talked about just yet?
Saskatchewan is actually quite unique in terms of our electricity grid. Our population is thinly spread out around the province, so the power needs to travel a very long way in some cases to get where it's needed. Some of our customers, particularly in the north, have electricity that's traveled hundreds of miles, and some of those grids will go through heavily forested areas and is susceptible to outages because of storms or tree contacts. And when the outage happens, it usually means longer outages for them because the crews have to travel to the location, and that's usually during challenging weather. We're thinking, extreme storms of some sort. It is extremely expensive to build redundancy to these remote, sparsely populated areas. In the major centers and in southern Saskatchewan, there is a little bit more redundancy there. So if one goes out, we can reroute the electricity. But with few customers at the end of the line to offset those costs, it's usually one way in. We also, I've heard this number before, we have a crazy amount of power poles, and all but one of our communities in Saskatchewan is on the grid. That's 157,000 kilometers of line to get electricity to where you are. That's about 4 times around the earth. So in other areas, like particularly the Northwest Territories, the Yukon, what these remote communities would do is they would be running off of diesel instead of actually off of our electricity system, which brings its own problems with cost and reliability, particularly in terms of the fuel. And then just again, as an offside, I've sometimes heard concerns that because the electricity is traveling so far, that perhaps that there's a belief they pay more for electricity. They do not. My bill in Regina would be the same as somebody in Esterhazy, somebody in Lanigan, somebody in any of these small communities or up north. It's the same cost on your bill for residential customers.
Those are those are all really maybe some facts that are less known to those who are sitting on the call. I think the piece about communities, almost all but one are on grid, is something that is absolutely unique to Saskatchewan, because I know that that is not the case for many other provinces. I think of, again, Ontario and BC for different reasons. They have a lot of communities that self-generate and are dependent on diesel power. Some of the communities that are up north, or because of the mountains, are separate. I just maybe want to shift gears a little bit, and I know we're here to talk about some of our supply options and that planning, and either in the near term, in that 2030 target that you talked about, Nanette, or into the future. I hear SaskPower talking a lot about whether technologies are available now or in the future, and maybe back to you, Nanette, around what that means. Can you talk a little bit about availability and what are some ways that we evaluate technologies?
Sure. So there's a great slide up on the screen right now that basically shows the options that we have that we could decide to build today. That's what we're talking about. Available to us today is we could make a decision today. We need another natural gas plant. We need to add more wind and solar. They're sort of ready at our fingertips. Battery energy storage is on that list. And I've mentioned the facility that we have already started building. It is still developing technology. So it's available today. We're expecting it to continue to evolve, and that technology might become more useful to us. The cost might come down, but it is available today. Demand side management is a technology. It's not so much a supply option. It's more like energy efficiency measures, or maybe speaking to a large industrial customer who has a large load during our peak demand and seeing if we can shift that to a different time of day to help reduce that demand, which could help us reduce the need for some of that fossil fuel emitting generation. Distributed energy resources. This is speaking to things like net metering, solar panels on people's homes, for example. And I think there's a webinar coming up on that specifically to learn more about that one. And then you've also asked about how do we evaluate technologies? So we have a team of engineers at SaskPower, and specifically within my team, there's 10 engineers that have a system model, a few system models actually, that we run. And we take inputs from across the corporation and also from external parties. And we've got the whole, like every generator at SaskPower and all of the tie lines to our neighbors modeled in this computer model. And all those inputs go into the model, and you can look at, should we build option A or should we add option B, and how do they compare? And the model will tell you things like, what's the impact to the whole system cost? What happens to greenhouse gas emissions? It even looks at how the different units that are already on the system will change, how they will react, how often they will have to operate, or maybe they won't operate as often if we add this new technology. And so those all feed into our analysis, and then we take those decisions forward through governance to our decision makers. When I say governance, I mean sort of up the chain to the big decision makers that make the final call.
Right. Also appreciate the plug for our upcoming information sessions. We'll get to that at the tail end of this. And maybe, Leanne, just some of your answers in the when we had the previous background up around outages. I know that that's something we're going to cover in more detail next week on the 5th.
I did see also somebody's asking a question about upgrading the distribution system for EVs. That also would be covered in that.
In next week's session.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll carry that question forward to our colleagues who will be chatting more about that next week. I know we made a few announcements in the last little while. I'm thinking the one that was just last week, I guess it was, around our SMR project. And I know that there's been a lot of news about that technology. I think we even had a question here around small modular reactors. Is it an option is it a resource and is it an option for the north? Could it be placed there? And just some curiosity around where we're at with that technology. And I can just share quickly that there is information on that technology and where things are at on our nuclear power project page, which is saskpower.com/nuclear, if you want to go check that out. But I know with that kind of announcement and that kind of news around an option like that, I know here you're highlighting, Nanette, a lot of different things that we're taking into account. But it can sometimes feel like SMRs is all we're thinking about. Do you want to just comment to that concern some people might have?
Sure, and I'll just point to our list for what's available after 2030. You can see that there's definitely more on that list than small modular reactors. That is a great option that we are, need to start the work now, even just to have it available to us as an option for 2030, because there's just a huge amount of work that goes into that process to get to the point where you can even make a decision. So other options that we'll consider for that same time period would be, as I mentioned before, additional Saskatchewan hydro, adding carbon capture and storage onto natural gas facilities. We've already done a carbon capture and storage facility on conventional coal, but we were first in the world to do that, and no one has done one on natural gas yet. So that's something that's technology that's still evolving. And then potentially hydrogen in the future. Our natural gas generators, you could imagine them potentially transitioning to a different fuel, such as hydrogen, to clean them up. I think I heard in your question, you'd mentioned that somebody online was asking, could nuclear be an option for the north? Mm-hmm. So we've recently announced the sites that'll be under consideration for a potential small modular reactor in Saskatchewan. It could be an option for the north, but I would think maybe in more small scale when I think of the north. I know that there's also some very small reactor projects underway. The Saskatchewan Research Council is looking at or working on adding a 5 megawatt very small modular reactor. And the specific use of that type of tiny reactor is exactly to support those, isolated communities that you were speaking of earlier, and potentially mine sites. So I think that could be a good use of small modular reactor technology in the north.
You touched on our carbon capture and storage project on coal. We actually did get a question when we were earlier talking about achieving net zero, and knowing that we did that, it was first of a kind. So I actually have two questions for you. So one from the audience around, why can't we do CCS on another unit and eliminate more emissions, because it's already sequestered 4.5 million tons to date on Boundary Dam 3. So that's the first question. The other thing I'm a little bit curious about is you're talking about these future technologies and options. Given the fact that we were first to deliver CCS on coal, and we have a track record of being a leader in first of a kind, why can't we do that again for one of these other technologies?
Okay, very interesting questions. I think I'm going to roll them up into, hopefully I handled both at the same time. So I'm going to start with the first of a kind. I'm really proud of Saskatchewan for taking that on and building the first carbon capture and storage facility on a coal-fired power plant. I think that we kind of had a perfect storm here of expertise that made us the best location to take on that additional risk that comes from building the first of anything. There's always those growing pains from something that's new. And so in Saskatchewan, we have over 70 years experience with conventional coal generation. Most of our grid at the time was based on conventional coal, and we knew that we had to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it really made sense for us to look for a technology that we could develop and champion to help reduce those emissions. We also, our power plants are very close to the International Energy Agency's greenhouse gas Weyburn-Midale CO2 monitoring and storage project, which was a research project going on very close to our power stations that was the largest in the world at the time. And so they had built up expertise in that critical piece of storing that CO2 underground. And also in our province, we have a lot of oil and gas experts, and we needed that drilling technology to, I think we drilled the deepest well in Saskatchewan at the time for our storage project as well. So really we had everything we needed in the province to do that. And we had a need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions on one of our key resources. The second question as to, okay, so why shouldn't we do that again? That's a good point. I think we're looking for other jurisdictions now to take that lead in areas where they're the experts and let us follow along behind and learn from that experience. The same way we were hoping that people would sort of build on our coal technology expertise, we're looking for others to develop that in other areas. Similar to the small modular reactor project, we're working closely with Ontario Power Generation, who's looking to build a small modular reactor next. They're going to be the first in Canada. And so that's good news for Saskatchewan because we've never done nuclear before, but Ontario has. So that makes sense for them to take the lead on that and for us to learn from them. And there was a question about, will we do more? Or can we do more carbon capture on coal? We certainly could. We've built up a lot of expertise in that area. There are still challenges there with cost and reliability. And it was that first of a kind, just working through the technology challenges. So it's yet to be seen how much uptake there will be elsewhere for carbon capture on coal.
Okay. We also got a question on just thinking about the imports and from the States. And again, our emissions target. How do we take into account the emissions from imports if they're coming from a grid that isn't a clean option, not like Manitoba with hydro, coming, say, from the States, for example? How does that impact our target toward that 2030, 2035, 2050?
Okay, there's a couple of interesting things there. Right now, regulatory wise, we don't have to count those emissions technically. The emissions are counted where they're created. So when we export natural gas power, we have to accept those emissions. But when we import, say, natural gas power, we don't see that same hit to our greenhouse gas emissions. Now, to be conservative and careful, we are in our planning counting emissions from our future imports where we're not sure what that technology is going to be yet. And we're not sure if regulations might change in the future. So when we look forward, we are being conservative and making sure that we sort of give an allowance for the need to potentially count those emissions going forward. There are a lot of renewables in the South, so we're hopeful that we can get both a firm product that can meet our needs for reliability, but also has some good greenhouse gas emissions profile to it.
Okay. I didn't know about it. I mean, regulations, I guess, could change, so that's something I know that we're always sort of taking into consideration and thinking about is how regulations change from different levels. I don't want to get too much in the weeds of regulations here. What I do, though, want to talk about next is just, I know we have 15 minutes left in our hour, but I just want to touch on the concept of electrification. I see that we got a question here around what we're doing and what our plans are for infrastructure for electric vehicles, for specifically for small communities. But I just first, maybe can we define what electrification means? And yeah, let's start there. And then maybe address the question here.
Probably the simplest way of explaining electrification for our purposes is replacing other energy supplies, gas or oil, with electricity for the purpose of reducing emissions. So that's why Canada's been giving this net zero mandate, so it can provide a cleaner energy supply by 2035 for the rest of the economy to transition by 2050. I did see a question too about the load demand and how we expect that to affect some of this. We're not sure how quickly electrification could be adopted on a number of levels. we're not sure how many people are going to buy EVs. It seems to be increasing faster and faster. I'm seeing more and more of them on the road. Electrification can also mean transitioning your gas-fired furnace to another option to heat your home the next time you have to replace it. We do know that by 2035, gas-powered vehicles will not be for sale in Canada, according to regulations, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to hand your keys in on January 1st, 2035 either. So there will be some transition time with that. SaskPower is doing its best to maneuver through the load demand uncertainty. We're also seeing that the economy is doing very well here in Saskatchewan. We've heard lots of announcements about canola crushing plants and potash mines, BHP up by Lanigan. But there's also more ability to self-generate and to manage how much electricity you consume through conservation efforts. And, you know, honestly, the cleanest and cheapest electricity is electricity that isn't consumed.
Right. I appreciate you touching on the fact that we're trying to sort of navigate those changing waters and changing landscape around, you know, increased electrification, increased use of electric vehicles, especially after that 2035 mark, and that it's a bit of a challenge to think through the load, like the grid capacity, like how much more do we need to bring online in order to support those changes, both at like an individual residential level, but also from an industrial perspective and for our commercial clients as well. I know we've been talking a lot about key technical considerations that our teams are working through here. I just want to make sure we have time just to discuss or to think about some other considerations that we maybe haven't yet touched on here. I don't know, Leanne, do you want to speak to
I'm
some of
pretty
those?
passionate about this, so I'll try to keep myself under control. But the fact of the matter is clean transition will be affecting people. The one that's closest to my heart are coal-reliant employees and communities. I work with them a lot. We have people that have chosen what they thought were very stable, reliable careers in coal mining or in our power plants, coal-fired power plants. Families and communities are being affected by that. They've spent their lives and their careers in Estevans and Cornax, and they're seeing that this is affecting them. And I really truly believe like a just transition across the board really needs to be part of the conversation. I did see a question about how this is going to impact utility rates. I can say we're going to continue to be transparent about the rate strategy, how SaskPower is approaching rates, and have the need for regular moderate rate increases. SaskPower's mission is to deliver reliable, sustainable, and cost-effective power. Decisions are made based on the perspective of balancing costs, reducing emissions, and delivering safe and reliable electricity. But I also see this transition also giving us a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of things that we just don't know yet. Technology is evolving at the speed of light, and it could really open up some opportunities for Saskatchewan and Saskatchewan people. So I think the future is wide open as well in terms of this transition.
You talked a little bit about you know, our employees or our communities, our coal communities. We did actually get a question around our labor force numbers from now into 2050, so that forward-looking projection. Do we have a comparison or any information on workers required, in this case, per kilowatt? That's an intensity. Maybe, I don't know if we have that kind of granularity or can share that today. That's pretty detailed.
I do not have that. I can say, and we do know that a lot of these cleaner generation options are using fewer employees, but again, there's some hydrogen, SMRs. We're not clear on exactly what we need just yet in terms of skills and numbers. But yes, some of the cleaner technologies do require fewer employees than perhaps a coal-fired power plant.
Someone shared a concern around relying on technologies that haven't been developed yet. I know, Nanette, you highlighted that we aren't solely dependent on them. In fact, we're depending on someone else being first to develop and bring those to market and go through some of those pain points and understand the costs and what to do better next time. Do you have any comments on that idea that was shared around?
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
actually. I think it just highlights one of the points I was making at the beginning, which is, for those reasons, we see net zero by 2035 as being not possible because we aren't relying on technology that's not developed yet. We are trying to help develop it. We're following people who are developing it, and we're looking for it to help us in the future. But in the interim, we're really working to add a lot of renewables and transition out of conventional coal by adding some natural gas generation and imports. And so, we'll have renewables, we'll have some smaller options that I've mentioned, but the mainstay will be some additional natural gas and imports that will kind of bridge us over to that time when we will hopefully have some of those low or even non-emitting options available to us.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for reminding us of some of those ideas that you shared off the hop. I'm just taking a quick look to see if there are other questions. I know, Leanne, you touched on some of the cost considerations and cost information, and it sounds like where we try to be transparent is around rate changes. But just some questions around what the power costs from now to 2050 would look like to support that plan that downward trending graph. Do we know what those look like right now? Do we have a ballpark figure we can share? Anything we want to share now?
That might, Nanette, I don't personally have those. I don't know if they are available that I've seen to 2050.
Sorry, could you recap what was the question? I heard Leanne and I was like, I'm good.
Leanne's got it.
Leanne doesn't
Leanne.
have it this time. I apologize.
She just wanted to make that clear. She didn't have the answer. Over to you, Nanette. No, the question is just around like what the power costs will look like from now to achieve that 2050. Like, do we know what the cost is going to be to support that long-term plan?
It's really a challenge to figure out, and it's partially because those technologies really aren't developed. So they're evolving, they're developing, we're learning about them, but to really put a final cost to it right now is difficult.
I can say we have seen the cost of wind and solar reduced significantly over the last 5-10 years. It's a very economical choice, intermittent, obviously, but it's really come down in cost.
Yeah, and that's a great example of how you're hoping that as people take up these technologies and more occur, that the cost will come down.
Just on that, and I know that we had someone talk about this a little bit earlier, and I brought that to the two of you to discuss a little bit more. But if we have, you talking about the RFQ process, Leanne, around some of these projects being developed by a third party, and is there like from a cost management perspective, is that a way we reduce the impact on SaskPower by having someone else develop a project and sell us that power? Is that true or no?
Again, I may be batting outside my expertise, but I would say that it does bring a level of expertise. They've done it. They have. They've done it many times on a large scale. So I would assume that they are doing it at a very cost-effective way.
Yeah.
Alexis, I did also see a question about CCS and marketing the technology around the world. I can answer that in that BHP, the mining company, and SaskPower partnered to create the International Knowledge Center on CCS. They are situated at the University of Regina, and they, in fact, this is what they do. They promote the CCS technology around the world.
Okay. I see that we have 3 minutes left. I think we've gotten to most of the questions. There are a few I don't know if we have too much time for, because we do have to stop at the top of the hour. So I'm just going to do like a quick wrap up because I think we've answered what we can with the time that we have left. I know we will try to share this recording and post it. I think we've had some technical difficulties already. I could hear that we went on and off record, but I'm hoping that we can post this for those of you who are wondering and have asked that question. I just want to jump now to some upcoming events and some tools that we've have available for folks to engage a little bit more with the work that we are doing. First off, today was the first of a 5-part series of online learning events. We plugged a few of those coming up earlier. We're offering these to folks across the province and beyond. Next conversation is October 5th, and that again will be during the lunch hour. So on the 5th, we're going to be discussing a little bit more about how our power flows. So that'll include details on how we manage the grid and move power from those generation options that we've been talking about today to you. We just also want to remind you that we have the online engagement hub, saskpower.com/engage. And we also have a new tool that's just recently launched on our generation dashboard. So it's essentially an up-to-date report on the amount of power that is being produced by all the supply options we've been talking about today. So please check those out. I think we'll share a link to those in the chat. So I see that we have a saskpower.com/engage there. And we'll also share the link to that dashboard I mentioned. We have 1 minute left. So with that, I'm just going to thank both Nanette and Leanne for coming together and sharing ideas and thoughts today. It was a really interesting conversation and discussion. I also want to thank all of you for taking the time during your lunch hour to join us and listen in. And just before we close, I just want to share that there is going to be a quick poll that will pop up when we end our meeting. We'd really love if you could take the time to fill in some of those answers because it helps us make these sessions better in the future. So thanks again. We look forward to connecting at a future event, and that's it for now.